Why did the North lose more soldiers than the South? Given that there were more Northern soldiers, that means they could have stopped their soldiers from getting shot as much as the Confederates by simply firing more. Did the South just have better soldiers?
The North did indeed have more soldiers than the South during the American Civil War, but there were several reasons why the North suffered more casualties. One reason was that the North was fighting a war on two fronts against the Confederate Army and also against Confederate guerrilla forces and irregular units that operated behind Northern lines. These Confederate units often targeted Northern supply lines, communication networks, and other strategic targets, and they made it difficult for the North to maintain control and security in the Confederate-held territory it occupied. Another reason was the difference in tactics and strategy used by the two sides. The Confederate Army, which was often outnumbered, relied on tactics such as hit-and-run raids, ambushes, and surprise attacks, which could be highly effective against a larger, more unwieldy force. The Union Army, on the other hand, often engaged in large-scale battles and assaults, which were more costly in terms of casualties. Additionally, the North's advantage in manpower and resources was offset by the South's advantages in terrain and geography. The South had a more favorable landscape for defensive warfare, with many forests, hills, and rivers that provided natural obstacles and made it more difficult for the Union Army to advance. It's also worth noting that the quality of the soldiers on both sides was high, and both the Union and Confederate armies had their own strengths and weaknesses. The outcome of battles often depended on a variety of factors, including the leadership and strategy of the commanders, the state of the troops, and the conditions on the ground. Ultimately, the North's victory in the Civil War came at a high cost in terms of casualties, but it was a critical moment in American history that helped to abolish slavery and to preserve the unity of the nation.
How come the Confederates could beat the North in terms of deaths and casualties, but overall still lose the war?
The Confederates were able to inflict high casualties and deaths on the Union Army in several key battles, such as Antietam, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. However, the Confederates lost the war for several reasons. Firstly, the Union had a larger population, more resources, and more industrial capability, which gave them a significant advantage in terms of supplies, manpower, and armament. Additionally, the Union was able to maintain a strong naval blockade of the Confederacy, which disrupted their ability to trade and receive supplies from abroad. This made it difficult for the Confederacy to maintain its army and fight a prolonged war. Another factor was the Union's strategic advantage. The Union had a strong centralized government and was able to focus its resources on key objectives, such as capturing key Confederate cities, disrupting transportation networks, and controlling the Mississippi River. The Confederacy, on the other hand, had a more decentralized government and struggled to coordinate its efforts and resources effectively. Finally, the Union was able to enlist the support of African American troops, which proved to be a decisive factor in the war. These troops provided the Union with additional manpower and played a significant role in several key battles. Overall, while the Confederates were able to inflict high casualties and deaths on the Union Army, the Union's larger population, resources, and strategic advantages allowed them to ultimately win the war.